Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about The Wide Window by Lemony Snicket. This is book the third of series of unfortunate events. Okay, so I will admit, this is not the book I'm supposed to be reviewing right now. I picked this one up specifically because I am reading an 800-page book that I really thought I was going to read super quickly, and once I got into it, I discovered no, it's not a quick-moving read, and also I've been distracted. So I'm just not going to have it read in time to write a review, record it, and put it up by, Saturday. And so, I happen to have just recently bought more of the series of unfortunate events. So I read these back in high school or college, I don't remember, soon after they came out, but I read my sister's copies, and I liked them enough that I always sort of wanted to get them, but not enough to, invest in the entire, collection. But they appear a lot in secondhand stores. Every time I go to the thrift store, there's at least one or two of them. So I've just been picking them up as I go. But that does mean I have a very random and sporadic collection of series of unfortunate events, and I've been reading them when I get the next one in the line, and I got this one 2 days ago. And I was looking at this book going, I can read that in about 2 hours. So I decided I was just going to quickly read it, give y'all a review of this book. So warning before I jump in here, I have been a little bit less careful about spoilers in this review than I usually try to be. I feel like I do try to avoid big spoilers in my reviews. Anything that happens more than 3/4 of the way through the book, I try not to reference it by exact detail unless I clearly state beforehand this is going to be a spoiler. And I did not really do that with this one, because I feel like this series is well enough known that you probably have a good idea what's going to happen in this book, even if you have not read it. But also, the entire gimmick of this book, the entire premise of the series of unfortunate events, is from page 1. The narrator is telling you over and over again, this is not going to end well. The kids are not going to end up happy with this guardian. These characters are not going to survive. The kids are not going to have a happy ending. So I feel like the book itself gives a huge amount of spoilers. There's enough foreshadowing that a lot of things that I would usually count as a spoiler, I don't with this one. So anything that by the end of the first chapter it's incredibly obvious it's going to happen, yeah, I just stated outright. So if you really do want to read this book and have not read it and have not seen the Netflix show and have not seen the movie and really want to go into this with completely blank slate, go ahead and stop the review right now, or silence it and let it keep playing so I still get the watch hours and you don't have to watch it. One or the other. But for everybody else, let's talk about what this book is. Okay, for anyone who does not know this series, these books follow the Baudelaire orphans. Their parents died in a horrible fire that destroyed the family home, and now they are alone, being passed around to different guardians by Mr. Poe, who's in charge of the estate. Luckily, they are unusually intelligent and resourceful children. Violet, the eldest, is a great inventor. Klaus, the middle child, is incredibly well read and remembers everything he's ever read. And then there's Sunny, who's an incredibly smart, brave, and active infant with incredibly sharp teeth and a great love of biting things. They need all their skills because they are being chased by a man named Count Olaf, who is after the fortune that they stand to inherit. And to get this fortune, he knows he needs to be their guardian. This book starts with the Baudelaires being dropped off with their Aunt Josephine, who lives in a house on the very edge of a cliff above Lake Lachrymose. The poor woman is scared of pretty much everything, except, annoyingly, Captain Sham, the new guy in town who the Baudelaires instantly recognize as Count Olaf in disguise. Can the kids convince anyone that this man is dangerous before it's too late? Can they survive if they fail? Okay, so I do love these books, though I honestly find them a little bit morose in the long run. If I read them too quickly, if I read too many of them at once, I actually do start to get depressed, which is a bit funny for kids' books. And I know, the woe is me, attitude is meant to be funny. It is sort of poking fun at stories where everything that could possibly go wrong does go wrong, and in fact many things that couldn't possibly go wrong still manage to go wrong. Like, the entire gimmick of the story is this story will not have a happy ending. No, really, it won't. Even though these are kids' books, these kids are not going to have a happily ever after. Give up on the idea now. But what makes these books more than just that gimmick is the fact that even though these are silly, short little books, there is real heart and very real pain in these books. There are some utterly beautiful descriptions of grief and loss. And far more than that is the pervasive feeling of helplessness that runs throughout the entire series. No matter how hard they try, no matter how inventive Violet is, no matter how well-read Klaus is, and no matter how hard Sunny bites things, they are not going to save their guardians. They are not going to send Count Olaf to jail, and they are not going to end in a happy home. And they are not going to bring their parents back from the dead. And that feeling is everywhere in these books. It's exaggerated, played to the extreme, with the adults around them ignoring really obvious signs of what is really going on, and not even really trying to help the kids quite often. But these exaggerations, while making it more palatable for younger audiences, even though it does feel a bit silly, it does not remove the sting of the inherent feeling. And I think that's what made these books so popular, what made them so powerful, because childhood is a time of helplessness. You often are literally in a state that you cannot help yourself. You have to rely on adults to take care of you. And for a lot of kids, there is an innate feeling that these adults around them are either being obstructions to whatever needs to happen, or are actively trying to work against what the kids think need to happen. And the journey the Baudelaires go throughout the entire series is growing from fully relying on adults to fully taking care of themselves, which is a journey that most people will go through. That is sort of the journey of growing up. And these kids in this book are forced to do it too quickly, way too young, and too completely. They are often very isolated, and I know how the series ends, and I really want to reference it here, but I'm not going to because that ruins, the entire damn series. But these books are a tragedy, but they are the tragedy of becoming an adult. And so they are going to hit very hard. And the melancholy, in my mind, is part of what makes these books so good. But of course, they are also really funny books. Now, much of the humor in these books is very specific. It comes in the form of stating the obvious as though it were not obvious. There are lots of moments where something utterly terrible will be happening and the narrator will say, the kids were a bit upset about this. Things like that. The understatement. There are so many jokes that come in 3 very specific parts. The narrator will tell us the kids as a whole are feeling something or thinking something, and then each kid will have a line of dialogue that expressly states what they are feeling. And it's very repetitive. It tends to come in the exact same pattern, so it's really drawing attention to the humor of 3s, and there are 3 kids, so it fits the rules of the jokes. And this is the kind of joke that honestly would get old very quickly, except the other side of the humor is inverting that on a regular basis. It will set up these incredibly obvious patterns and then switch it up for us. A really good example of how it does this is with the definitions. One of the biggest stylistic elements of these books is that the narrator is constantly defining more complex words for the reader. And after this is well established, that yes, you will get definitions of really complex words, and they will be dictionary-appropriate definitions, suddenly there will be a moment when, no, the definition is in no way helpful, or is only helpful in this very specific scene. Like a word will be defined as, this is a word that means Count Olaf is mad at this, and things like that. But also there'll be moments where like a word is described, there's one in here that futility is described as being futile. And that is the punchline. The punchline is the definition is not actually helpful in any kind of way. And this is a humor that is very, very dry, and I love it. And there is more, like, traditional kid humor in here as well, like just funny lines thrown in. Like, I made a short about, there's a line in here about you should not stick things that you are allergic to in your mouth, especially cats. And that's just actively funny, but the overarching humor of the book is very dry and somewhat intellectual, which is unusual for kids' books, but I think it works for kids. Now, that being said, I do not think that the humor always works. Especially, there is one element of this book that just is not great humor-wise. So Olaf has his acting troupe, who are basically his minions, and they all have ridiculous descriptions that are like, ooh, this one's really tall, that one's really bald. But the one that appears most commonly in this book, I think the only minion that appears in this book, is a person who no one can tell if they are male or female. And that's fine. Like, sure, why not? There are non-binary people, but even ignoring that, there's also intersex people, and there are people who fully identify as one gender or the other, but because the genetic lottery did not quite give them the set of cards that they expect, they don't look like it. There are women who have beards, and it's not because they are trans or anything, it's just because hormones gave them beards. There are plenty of women with broad shoulders. There are men with broader hips. There are men with bubble butts. There are men with boobs. And there are plenty of people who have just androgynous faces that if they're not wearing a dress or a full suit, you're not sure what gender to call them. And that's fine. These people exist. The problem is, in this book, one of those people is the butt of the joke. And the entire joke is that you can't tell what gender they are. That is the humor. And to make it even more uncomfortable here, it starts out just like throughout the entire book, when we meet the character, they are referred to as he or she. He or she did this. He or she did that. But then it sort of transitions into the narrator and the characters calling them it, which is not okay. And then they start referring to this person as the creature, which is just fully turning someone who just happens to not fit gender norms into a monster. And yeah, when I was reading it, I was thinking, wow, that's really dated. But even when these books came out, that was gonna be offensive to some people. Like, I can remember when I was a kid, there were people who I met who I was not sure what gender they were supposed to be presenting as. I did not know. And most of the time, it's not a choice. It's just genetic lottery gave them a shape that does not automatically quickly read to us as male or female. And to make even worse, this person is exceptionally large. So basically, they are just a big overweight person that you cannot tell what gender they are, and they're being referred to as a creature and it, and yeah, that's not a good look. That's not great, and it wasn't great when the books were published. That does not hit right. But setting that aside for now, I do want to say that it did bother me as well that Josephine's whole thing is that she is obsessed with grammar. To the point that she is correcting people all the damn time. And one of the first signs in this book that she's going to not be a good guardian is the fact that she corrects the kids' grammar in moments when they are trying to express serious emotional things. And like the book pointed out, that this is not how you should react to someone, you know, expressing grief. This is not helpful in this moment. But what bothers me about this, because like that's all fine, that's all good, that's a theme. What bothers me is most of the time when she's correcting the older Baudelaires, the kids weren't wrong. Like, there's one moment when Klaus is negotiably incorrect, like he is being repetitive, but all the other moments are questions of style, not grammar. And I know it's stupid, but that bothers me. And like, the reason grammar thing is here in the first place, other than just plot purposes, is to make the point that prescriptivism is sort of antithetical to useful communication. And I think in the end, even the fact that she's calling something wrong when it's really just not to her liking is part of the point here. Like, I think it is trying to make that point as well. So maybe it's good that I noticed that that's not really wrong. of course, Josephine's desire to control things and keep everyone safe is a large part of what puts everyone in danger in this book. And that's why the section that covered this book in the original movie really bothered me. And this bit's going to be a bit of a tangent, but just stick with me. I watched the first section of the Netflix series, and I very much enjoyed it, but I don't have Netflix, so I never saw the rest of it. But the original movie, I saw that one several times. Like, at one point I had the DVD, so yeah, I'd put it on and watch it. And the part of that movie that really bothered me, because everything else, like, there were elements of it that were wrong, whatever, but what really bothered me was the Hurricane Herman scene. Because it literally contradicts the main moral of this book. And I do find it funny because the book literally ends with the narrator discussing the fact that, like, oh, I'm not sure this story has a moral. What is the moral? We don't know. When this book has such an obvious moral. It is so clear to me. It is so upfront. Josephine lets her life be so dictated by her fears that she puts herself in danger. The most obvious example of this is, of course, her house. It's precariously placed on the top of a tall hill over Lake Lachrymose, but she can't sell this immensely dangerous house because she's irrationally afraid of real estate agents. And the real estate agent fear, of course, never comes up. There are no real estate agents in the book. Spoilers here. But the house? Yeah, that's a real legitimate fear. And in the end, like, she could have survived and saved the kids if she had just been brave enough to do pretty much anything at any point. And in that stupid movie, they had the scene where all of Josephine's irrational fears suddenly become reality. She's afraid the doorknobs will explode for some reason. Well, in the storm, one of the doorknobs explodes. She's afraid that the fridge will topple over on someone. Well, in the storm, the fridge topples over and almost crushes the kids. And she's afraid that the stove will burst into flames, and in the storm, yes, the stove bursts into flames. And the point of all these fears is that they are irrational, that they are interrupting her life for no real reason, versus the real rational fears that Olaf would try to kidnap the kids, that the house might fall, that the leeches could eat someone. The book is about setting aside the irrational fears so that you can deal with the rational ones. And that scene in the movie has stuck in my head throughout all these years because it was such a failure to understand even the basic premise of the damn book. But putting that tangent aside, I do want to talk a bit about the ending of this book. Without going into too many spoilers here, there's a point in the end of the book where everyone is just sort of standing around and letting Olaf do his thing. And that's it. And it feels really stagnant and weird and weak, and I really can't help but read it and go, oh my god, you outnumber him! Just fucking tackle him! And nobody does. Nobody does anything. They just sort of stand there. And I get that we are supposed to be feeling despair here. We're supposed to be feeling the helplessness. We're supposed to be feeling that feeling of kids trying to stand up against an adult. But it feels less like despair and more like the plot didn't make sense unless everyone just stood by and let Olaf do his thing. And I mean, yeah, the adults are always standing around letting him do his thing, but the kids are usually a bit more active. And I think what's really going on here is that the book, this should have been the book where we start seeing the kids actively trying to capture Olaf, but we don't, because that's saved for later on in the series. And it just doesn't quite work for me. It makes the ending feel really dissatisfying. And I remember when I read this one the first time, I got to the end and I was like, oh, okay. And I think it was because of this weird, stagnant, everyone standing around ending. But otherwise, this is a cute little book with surprising emotional depth. It is a bit silly, it's a bit gimmicky, it's a bit ridiculous. There are a lot of leaps of logic that you'll just have to accept that do not match our reality, but they are consistent throughout the series. Like, the legal issues are very different than how it would turn out in real world, but It does not matter. These are kids' books. But what has given this entire series sticking power is the serious emotions it deals with and normalizes, as well as the fact that for all its constant statements of doom and gloom, the kids do survive. They have each other and they grow with each book. This gives the readers the reassurance and hope that they too will survive the hopeless, helpless times in their lives. They are fun books to read as adults because there are a lot of jokes hidden in the vocabulary and things like that, which will be a lot funnier to adults than they might be to kids reading them. And they're just quick reads. So if you haven't picked up a series of Unfortunate Events by now, go right ahead. It's fun. You can probably make it through the entire 13 books in maybe a couple of weeks. I don't suggest reading them all back to back because I do think that they inspire a feeling of depression, but read one or two, take a break, read a couple of others. You can literally read one a night.